Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Mess. So today I got a fun and exciting episode for you guys today, because if you can't tell already, this is NES Emulation, this is Punch-Out, but it doesn't look like anything you've ever seen before. That's because 3D Sen or 3D SCN is now out, and it is 100% a mind-blowing revelatory experience of just what you can do with NES Emulation in 2025. It basically takes all of the games that it has profiles for, configures them into voxel diorama style 3D games, and that is just absolutely wild. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But what other NES emulator is going to allow you to zoom into the scene like Zelda 2 here, pan the camera around and just make it a completely 3D environment? Honestly, some of the tricks and some of the overall imagery in 3D Sen are absolutely something that you're just going to look at and wonder, how the hell did anyone, one, come up with this idea, and two, actually execute on it? Because it's basically taking all of the sprites and all of the background layers and converting them over into voxels to give you a full 3D diorama. Now, of course, playing around with the camera is just a fun party trick, because you're not going to play Zelda 2 from any other angle other than that head-on 2D style, but this game just is absolutely insane when you actually see it in this diorama, and you can zoom in and out on the action, basically giving you a different viewport depending on what type of level you're playing. And honestly, the first time you see this in motion, especially when you're playing it, you're going to be A, so confused as to how it actually works, and B, so impressed that it works in the first place. This is just a completely new way to see a game that we're all super familiar with, and honestly, I'm always blown away by just how creative emulator makers can be out there in bringing new features to emulators and basically recreating the NES. And honestly, that's what it feels like here in 3D Sen. Like somebody decided that they could recreate the hardware of the Nintendo Entertainment System and turned it into a 3D voxel-based console versus the 2D sprite and background layer console that we remember from the 80s and early 90s. Think of like the MSU1 chip on the Super Nintendo. It doesn't technically exist in hardware, it is just a concept, but that concept executes as something that feels like it actually existed. And I want you to be aware that there's about 100 profiles for 3D Sen right now, so if you're looking to play one and only one game and you want to make sure your favorites there, definitely check the roster of games that are available before you drop the $8.99 on Steam. And even though there are going to be more profiles coming, I just want you to be aware of that. And I'm also hyper impressed that they have this thing for sale on Steam in any way, shape, or form, because Nintendo's juggernaut Cannonball Run approach to suing everybody and anything emulation definitely has me wondering if this might actually get a little bit of hell from Big N somewhere down the line. I certainly hope not, but you never know. But Castlevania here just has such an incredible look to it. You can see the depth when you jump, you can see the size of the platforms, and in some ways it actually makes some of the platforming relatively easier, because this game definitely just going to drop you into those pit deaths basically anytime it has the opportunity to. As far as the performance is concerned, if you take a look at the specs, you can run this thing on a potato. Maybe just make sure that potato isn't molding or kind of weeping around the edges, and you should be totally fine. It'll automatically bind itself to any sort of control pad you want. I use an Xbox Series X for this one, but you can also use the built-in keyboard for your computer, and that's what it's going to be bound to by default. But you have your options as to what you want to play around with. But honestly, as the first boss in Castlevania drops down, this bat here, sometimes you can see that it still maintains that kind of 2D aesthetic. Sure, you can zoom the camera in and turn it and see the bat from the side, but you still get his drop shadow on the wall, and that's because this is taking place in a 3D engine, except it's taking the concept of what Castlevania was on the NES and pivoting it to that. And honestly, that might confuse you for the first few minutes. There's going to be a cognitive dissonance between what you expect, which is sprites, versus what you're getting here, which is 3D. But once your brain kind of wraps its head around what exactly is going on screen, and that initial awe factor kind of wears off, you're just left with an absolutely competent NES emulator that basically makes a lot of these games feel brand new, like you're playing them for the first time again. But of course, it's not changing anything in the gameplay up. This is Castlevania. It's not going to be technically any different than what you played on NES. It's just going to look absolutely different because it's in full 3D, basically making it feel like a diorama. And as far as the actual emulation quality on offer here, it is good. And I know everyone's going to ask, how is the sound quality in the emulation? So we're going to our first soundtrack sample, 45 seconds, and I'll be right back with a lot more games to show you in here. mean, that just sounds like Super Mario Bros. 3, and that's because the sound quality is absolutely perfect here in 3D Sen. And I always love the fact that Super Mario Bros. 3 was basically set up as a stage play, as a concept. When you see those curtains draw at the beginning of the game, it's basically just watching Mario go through a play. And now with all of these 3D voxels, it really does feel like you're staring into a stage. And it's one of those things, if you're watching this video, most of the impact is going to come across when this is actually in front of you on your monitor and you're checking it out. You're just going to be completely immersed in the world, and that is a ton of fun because, again, it basically makes these things feel brand new and fresh. And to load up another game, it is the easiest thing in the world. You're going to get all of the profiles here, so you can kind of browse through them and just go ahead and select whatever game you want, and you're just going to navigate to the folder that they live in. I've already done that here. You pick your ROM, and then immediately it's going to load up, and obviously, if you can't tell already, we're going to check out Contra next, one of my favorite NES games of all time. Leave me a comment down below and you tell me what's your favorite NES game and which one would you love to see in 3D Sen. Now this one definitely uses the 3D voxel style a little bit more subdued, and it's kind of fun to see what the makers decided for each game. You get that kind of depth in the overall image. Those platforms are coming out of the screen and they do pivot left to right, but it still maintains that pure 2D kind of side-scrolling running gun gameplay, and I think it does an excellent job of it. So some of the 3D is going to be absolutely dramatic, like you saw in something like Zelda 2. Other games like Contra here are going to be a little bit more minimalized as far as that 3D works, but I think it's a very intelligently designed system because it doesn't add any more 3D than it needs to. And I even love how the edges of the world basically appear and disappear, almost like they're going into the void. It is just such a fun visual treat to see something like this running, but of course, again, it's going to be the same game you played back on NES, so it's not like Contra here is going to be any easier, any harder. It's just going to be a hell of a lot more 3D, and honestly, as far as innovations in emulation are concerned, this is one of the things that impresses me the most in probably like the last 12 months or so, because there's basically an emulator for every console out there. So now, especially stuff from the 8 and 16 and even 32-bit era, you can kind of think outside the box and decide what else could you bring to the mix. But I would say probably my favorite example of any sort of 2D to 3D conversion has got to be Punch-Out. Seeing the ring in 3D, having those ropes up against the screen, and having the depth, it basically almost like a 45-degree angle looking down at the action, just works in the context of what the game is asking you. And it's also a great test for overall latency because honestly, even though I'm not that far into Punch-Out, you do have to have really good response time or else you're never going to be able to get to the end and fight Mike Tyson. So as far as the fights I went through are concerned, direct wired USB-C controller into my PC, there was no latency issues that I could detect whatsoever that would make me think that there was going to be an issue later on. Or something like DuckTales, another game which basically takes the concept of 3D but keeps it on that 2D plane. You get depth in the image, but you still have the basic 2D aspect ratio going on, and there is going to be fast forward and rewind buttons as well in the actual emulator, so it does have a nice quality of life feature set. But it's time for one more soundtrack sample because even though the Moon theme is now copyright flagged, which sucks, this game still has a spectacular soundtrack, so I'll be right back with more. I mean, the audio is DuckTales, and you definitely cannot go wrong with that. And this is another one that I actually really like the look of the voxels on. I really didn't hit a game that I didn't care for this style, but there's something about the pure 2D platformers that basically make you feel like you're playing in a diorama that kind of hit the best, because of course Punch-Out, probably the most dramatic example of what you can do with a 2D to 3D voxel conversion, and it is fun, but again, there's just something about this kind of diorama aesthetic going on that I absolutely love. And if you've never been to the Art Institute of Chicago, where I went to college, there is a room in the bottom of the museum, the Thorn Miniatures room, and it's basically ornate miniatures of different period living rooms, bedrooms, and other houses, and there's just something about looking down into them and thinking to yourself, they look 100% absolutely real, but you know they're not in any way, shape, or form. That's the same vibe I get out of something like Punch-Out here. I played this game 100 times before, but playing it in 3D Sen, in the 3D voxel aspect, just 100% makes it feel brand new and like something I've never seen before. So definitely pick this one up. It's on Steam, it's $8.99, and honestly, it's about the best $9 you can possibly spend, especially if you're an NES fan. But we're done. I'll see you guys next time. Hope you enjoyed the video. Bye-bye.